60 Minutes Rewind.
The story of Lenell Geter, a man, as it turned out, wrongly accused of holding up a Kentucky Fried Chicken restaurant and got a life sentence for his quote-unquote crime. It took about 7 months to complete that story by doing the work that the police didn't do and doing the work that even his own defense lawyer didn't do, and certainly work that the prosecution didn't do. We were able to prove that this guy was innocent, and in effect, we saved a life.
Lenell Geter is in jail, no question about that. The question is, what happened? What put him there? Lenell Geter is a young black engineer, one of 6 graduates of South Carolina State College who were recruited by E-Systems, a major defense contractor in Greenville, Texas, a small town outside of Dallas. When he arrived there in 1982 from rural South Carolina, his future seemed secure. A clean-cut 24-year-old earning $24,000 a year as an engineer and planning to get married. 6 months later, he was arrested for the $615 armed robbery of a Kentucky Fried Chicken restaurant, convicted and sentenced to life in prison. Today, he is in a Texas state penitentiary and will not be eligible for parole for 20 years. His case has raised questions about his guilt or innocence and the fairness of the investigation, prosecution, trial, and the life sentence.
Did you ever hold up anyone?
No, sir. I never hold up anyone.
Did you ever steal anything?
No, sir.
Why you?
Sir, only thing I can say is I can only assert the fact that maybe it had to be jealousy because I was in a small town. I had only been there 6 months and I had a good job. It's a predominant white town.
What did you do with your time off when you weren't working?
Well, I was a member of the library club there in Greenville. I was on the softball team. I read a whole lot because I was preparing to enter school maybe next year, the following year, 83, to work on my master's.
I have absolute 100% confidence in the conviction of Lenell Geter as being the correct person who robbed 5 people at gunpoint in a Kentucky Fried Chicken store in Balk Springs, Texas.
Dallas County prosecutors Ken Carden and Randy Eisenberg say they are convinced he is guilty. They told the jury that Geter was an outlaw, known to the police, a hardened criminal beyond rehabilitation. In fact, there is not a shred of evidence that Geter had any police record anywhere.
Are you satisfied he has no police record now?
I'm satisfied that he has no record of final convictions anywhere in the United States.
Are you satisfied that he has a good reputation?
No. I'm satisfied that he had a good reputation among those people at E-Systems, but that's what comes from being a Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. We have people who do rob for fun, and Lenell Geter, I think, is one of them.
That, my friend, is a prosecutorial hallucination.
Ed Siegel, Lenell Geter's court-appointed attorney.
There's no kind of quirk in his character that's shown itself to anybody that knows him. There's no way they can sustain that.
Those people who knew Geter, his business associates at E-Systems, do not believe he could have done something like this. They insist he is innocent. He had never been in trouble before. He did not have a police record.
He would work late at night, after work, and go home. He didn't go crowds around at night or anything else. So, it just wasn't his character to do anything like he was accused of doing.
Here's an innocent man who got convicted and sentenced to life imprisonment, and we've now found out after the fact that the evidence that was offered was false.
How did it all happen? Could Lenell Geter have been a successful engineer who went out to rob fast food restaurants on his lunch hour or coffee breaks or after work? It all happened with the armed robbery of this Kentucky Fried Chicken restaurant in Greenville, Texas on August 9, 1982 by a young black male. The detective investigating was Lieutenant James Fortenberry of the Greenville Police. By his own admission, he was hurting for leads. So he had the local paper appeal to anyone who'd seen any strange vehicles in the vicinity of the restaurant to contact him. Fortenberry got a call from a white woman who lived across the road from this park in Greenville. She said she'd seen a black man park his car roughly where our car is parked, park it there a number of times. She became suspicious. The car had South Carolina license plates. Now, this park is some distance from the robbery, a good 3.5 miles. Fortenberry considered this a major lead. He traced the license plate, and the car turned out to be owned by Lenell Geter.
Well, that's my favorite reading place and place of meditating. It is a public park, and I usually go there and relax and feed the ducks because it's near the water and it's comfortable. But must I be suspicious because I go to a public park and read? That doesn't make any sense.
Fortenberry not only considered Geter a suspect in the Kentucky Fried Chicken robbery in Greenville, but he called the police in Plano, Texas, to tell them he might have a suspect for a similar robbery there. The Plano police told the police in Garland, Texas, that Geter might be a suspect for a robbery there. Well, suddenly, Jeter's picture was being circulated as a suspect in robberies all over the Dallas region.
Whatever started the investigation, once Lenell Geter's photograph began showing up in lineups, he began to be identified.
2 weeks after Lenell Geter's photo began being circulated, there was a rash of 3 armed robberies: a Taco Bell, a mugging in a drugstore parking lot, and another Kentucky Fried Chicken, this one in Balch Springs, Texas. The day after that, Lenell Geter was arrested and charged with all 3 robberies. There was some talk of plea bargaining, but Geter refused, maintained he was innocent, was tried swiftly, found guilty, and sentenced to life for the Kentucky Fried Chicken robbery at Balch Springs. Besides 5 eyewitnesses to that robbery, 2 other eyewitnesses for his other alleged crimes were produced at the trial. That drugstore mugging victim, Luann Hurd, identified Geter from a lineup. Not a live lineup, but an assembly of 6 mugshots of black men. One of them, Lenell Geter. But that was the second photo lineup police showed to Luann Hurd. The first one they showed her came from E-Systems. It showed all 6 young black engineers from South Carolina, Lenell Geter included.
His picture was in that lineup, and she's saying, I've never seen him before. Then they come back in with another lineup and said, have you ever seen any of these men before? And she says, yeah, I've seen that one, and it's Lenell Geter. Of course, she doesn't know whether she's seen him in the robbery or whether she's seeing him from, and she's recognizing from that spreadsheet that she just saw a few days earlier.
You were shown 2 photo lineups.
Yes, sir.
You know, and you didn't recognize Geter in the first one,
Yes, sir.
but you did in the second one.
Yes, sir.
How come? How come you didn't recognize him in the first one?
He wasn't there. He wasn't in the photographic lineup, the first one.
You know, he was. He was in that first lineup. It was 6 black engineers from the E-Systems. That was that first lineup. And he was there. Well, how can you account for that, missing him in that first lineup?
I don't really believe I did.
If I were looking at the photographic lineup that Luann Hurd was first shown, black and white photographs of 6 individuals, I don't know if I could pick Lenell Geter out of it myself. I mean, it's a very difficult lineup to pick him out of. In fact, she did pick him out of that lineup, and she picked him out of a color photographic lineup.
She didn't even know he was in the first lineup. And I told her yesterday, she said, no, he wasn't in that first lineup. And I said, yes, he was. That was the E-Systems personnel photograph.
The black and white photographs. I couldn't pick Lenell Geter out of the black and white photographic lineups either, but she had no problem with the color photographic lineup picking him out.
That's not quite accurate. Both lineups shown to Luann Hurd were black and white.
She had no problem picking him out in the courtroom.
The only black person in the court was the only black person sitting at counsel table, and there was no question as to who the defendant is.
Because the prosecution told him they had overwhelming evidence of Geter's guilt, because so much plea bargaining goes on in criminal court, Siegel assumed that Geter would plead guilty, perhaps even thought he was guilty himself. But when Geter absolutely refused to plea bargain, Siegel began to believe in him. But then on a Thursday afternoon, Siegel was told his case would be first up on Monday. He had barely 1 working day to prepare a defense.
My investigator, over the weekend, went to Greenville, Texas, and came up with alibi witnesses that showed Lenell Geter could not possibly have committed this crime on Monday because he was at work on that day. When I got that information, I got it by a telephone call over the weekend. I had absolutely no opportunity to talk to the people in advance. But when I did get that information, I thought that I would go over and talk to the prosecutor about it and talk to Judge Lyon about it.
Siegel asked the judge for a delay of a week, that he needed time to find witnesses who had placed Lenell Geter at work at the time of the Balch Springs Kentucky Fried Chicken robbery, a robbery that happened at 3:20 p.m., right in the middle of Jeter's working day. The judge refused to delay the trial.
If we had another week, obviously we would be able to get all the witnesses who saw Lenell Geter at work on that Monday.
There was only one defense witness that put Lenell Geter at work at the time that the robbery was committed, and he contradicted Lenell Geter. Geter said that he was at work but gone for an hour and a half that day, and the individual that was his supervisor, I believe his name is Charlie Hartsford, testified that Lenell Geter wasn't gone from work more than 5 or 10 minutes all day.
Charlie Hartford told us that when he testified Geter wasn't gone for more than 5 or 10 minutes, he was not considering Jeter's lunch hour. As far as that lunch hour was concerned, other workers at E-Systems can account for that time.
He left at noontime.
And he went to the bank, and Rick and I went down to the bank, and they remembered him coming to the bank and how long he stayed at the bank.
That was in the morning, though,
yeah.
that he went to
Yeah.
the bank, not in the afternoon.
But he did leave. But Carden made a big deal out of that, you know.
Did you check with the bank?
No. Jeter
Comes back
didn't
to work
testify
with the
that when he was gone from work for the hour and a half that he went to get a bank loan. He said he went to downtown Greenville and got a voter registration application. So you explain why Jeter got on the stand and lied if in fact he went and got a bank loan that day.
Lenell Geter was not lying. He did tell the court he went to the bank. Page 300 of the trial transcript. Jeter is asked, "Did you go into downtown Greenville during the lunch hour?" Answer, "That's correct." Question, "Why did you go to town that day at lunch?" Answer, "I had to go down and register to vote. I also stopped by the bank too." Question, "What bank?" Answer, First Greenville National Bank. That was the lunch hour. But what about the afternoon? Remember, that Balch Springs restaurant was robbed at 3:20 p.m. Well, at between 1 and 1:30, here at E-Systems, Charlie Hartford, Jeter's supervisor, gave Geter an assignment, one that would take 2 hours to do. Hartford got it back completed by 4:30. To have driven to Balch Springs, hold up the restaurant, and return to work would have taken Geter another 2 hours. It would seem impossible for him to have completed his assignment and the holdup in the same afternoon.
The fact he did this work for me, as far as I'm concerned, fixes him there the majority of the afternoon.
But the project that he said he gave him the day of the robbery, their records also show was not given to him the day of the robbery. Their records showed that it was given to him another day and that he could have had plenty of time to do that before.
It's just not true. I've got the records.
That's what we looked at. That's what we had the security guard come down here and testify.
Rick McCants, another E-Systems engineer, says he saw Geter twice that day, first at a coffee break at 2:45, and then about an hour later.
Then I came back around 3:45 because I wanted to find out if he got the loan. That's what my original intentions were. And he told me he did get the loan. Then I went back to my desk.
As we said, the trial came up suddenly. It had already begun when Jeter's attorney called E-Systems and asked his co-workers to get to Dallas as quickly as possible to testify on his behalf. Two people who were not called to testify and did not realize until after the trial that their testimony could have been crucial were Dan Walker and Deborah Cotton.
I talked to him shortly, right around 1 o'clock, and then again at 3, right at 3.
At 3 o'clock. And the robbery took place at 3:20.
3:20.
Absolutely impossible to get from
It was
E-Systems
impossible
to
for
Balch
Lenell
Springs.
Geter to be there.
He came by to use my phone at right around 3:45, somewhere between 3:45 and 4 o'clock that afternoon.
No way you could get back from Balch Springs in 15 minutes.
No.
There wasn't one person that I talked with that could provide Lenell Geter with an alibi the day of the robbery, the time of the robbery.
When you say you
I
talked
talked
to
with Ernie Locke. I talked with
Deborah Cotton?
no, Deborah Cotton was here in the hallway during during the trial. She wasn't called as a witness by the defense.
What about Walker?
Walker, I don't know whether Walker was in the hallway
Did
or
you
not.
talk to Hartford?
No, I talked with another supervisor by the name of I can't remember his name now.
Deborah Cotton sat in this hallway throughout the trial. I never talked to her, but she had the opportunity to get on that witness stand just like any other witness and tell what she knew. And if she could have provided him an alibi at the time, I don't see any reasonable explanation for her not doing exactly that, and she didn't.
You said that Deborah Cotton was out here. She wasn't out here at all.
There was a lady from E-Systems,
Black
I
or
was
white?
told, black, that was sitting out in the hallway.
Deborah Cotton's white.
Well, then
Again,
obviously,
Deborah Cotton never got on the
obviously I'm
stand,
relying
we
on
can't
what
say.
I'm relying on what Mr. Siegel told me to meet out
Deborah
in the
Cotton,
hallway
who
as being his
places Lenell
fiancée.
Geter at his desk at 3 o'clock, was not out here.
That's-
Was not spoken to, as far as I understand, by you or your investigator in advance of the trial. Mr. Walker, who places Lenell Geter there around 3:45 or 4 o'clock. Impossible he could have committed the crime. Talk to him. He used his phone. Lenell Geter used Walker's phone at his desk between 3:45 and 4. You didn't talk to them. You didn't send anybody out there to try in any way, in a highly questionable case with no physical evidence, to say maybe we're wrong on this one.
That's simply not true. We sent Artie Christian out there.
Did he talk to Deborah Cotton?
Well, I don't know who he talked to.
Well,
Artie went out there, he talked to the...
You don't know who your investigator talked to?
I know that he asked, did anyone out there have any indication to show that Lenell Geter actually had an alibi, actually was at work at 3 o'clock when the robbery went down?
I believe that your investigator spent most of his time with the security people at E-Systems.
I invite you
And,
to interview my investigator
I will.
and talk to him about what he did.
Did you talk to Deborah Cotton?
No,
Did you talk to Mr. Walker?
no,
Did you talk to Mr. Hartford that day?
no. Mr. Hartford was at the courthouse at the time. I was at E-System.
Did you know that Deborah Cotton and Dan Walker both placed Lenell Geter in E-Systems at 3 o'clock, again at 3:45, and again at 4 o'clock?
No, I didn't know. I wasn't aware of that, no.
Why didn't you go up to his floor, his department, talk to the people who worked with him?
I did go where he worked. The security guard took me through the areas where he worked, gave me sort of a tour around. When I went out to E-System, the individuals that worked or had testimony in this case was down here at the courthouse. When I went out there, I was not aware that anyone that had any information...
You mean you didn't go out there in advance of the trial?
No.
What did the prosecutors tell you to look for when they sent you out as an
Well,
investigator?
the prosecutor didn't actually tell me to look for anything. When I was aware of the fact that he had all the alibi witnesses coming in, you see, we have a dilemma. You have witnesses that have identified this guy as being at a robbery scene, and then you have his witnesses that say he was at work. So obviously a person cannot be at two places at once. So that was a problem. I went out to see if there was any validity as to what was happening or what the testimony was to be.
Aren't there some doubts in your mind about this young man?
The only problem that I would have had to begin with this case was when all of the alibi witnesses came down to testify for him. But it just turned out that none of them could alibi him during the time these robberies were committed.
Except for Deborah Cotton and Dan Walker.
Who did not testify in this case, and apparently we were not aware of their existence.
When you talk to the brass out there at E-Systems, what did they tell you about Lenell Geter?
They held him up very high, and as far as reputation and character and type of work that he did.
Was there any suggestion that there might be a darker side to him?
No, no, they just thought he was an outstanding young man, basically.
If I had any evidence subsequent to the trial to show me that Lenell Geter was innocent, I'd ask for at least an investigation. I'd send Artie back out there and we'd find out about it. None of the evidence that's come to my attention since the trial, before the trial, or during the trial shows me anything except that Lenell Geter is guilty of this offense.
The story will continue after this.
There was no physical evidence of Geter's guilt. No gun, no cash, no license plate taken down at the scene of a crime. The state's entire case was based on eyewitness testimony.
Eyewitness testimony is subject to a great deal of error. And that's all they have. They have absolutely no corroborating evidence whatsoever. They have 5.
It's pretty convincing.
Not really when you stop and think that each one of the persons who identified the robber described a person who doesn't even look like Geter. They have him from 5'6" to 6 foot tall. Some of them have him with whisker hair. Some of them have him with a mustache. Some of them have with long sideburns. All of them have him with long hair. He never looked like that.
People quite often get small details incorrect in their pictures of people, the pictures they mentally retain. But when you come face to face with someone, you don't tend to forget them.
But it's the small details that send a man away for life, so don't they have to be very, very carefully examined?
It's the live witnesses that you look at, listen to, and decide after you hear them on the stand that you believe them that send people to the penitentiary.
So Geter was found guilty. Then came the punishment, the sentencing phase of the trial. The prosecution asked the jury for life for Lenell Geter, and among its witnesses was Lieutenant Fortenberry. He told the court he'd telephoned the police in South Carolina, and a sheriff down there, Sheriff Ed Darnell, had said he knew Geter and knew him to be a bad character.
Sheriff Darnell, when Lieutenant Fortenberry called you, what did he want to know about Lenell Geter?
He was telling me about Geter and being a suspect in this armed robbery, and said that he just needed some information on him. And I told him, I said, well, I don't have anything on him. I don't know him at all.
Did you say to Lieutenant Fortenberry that if his name is Geter and he comes from Denmark, South Carolina, he must be or was probably an outlaw?
Definitely not. No, sir. No way, shape, or form.
If someone was a bad character in your county, do you think you'd know him?
I think I would. We have less than 19,000 people here, and I know most of them. The bad characters especially.
It wasn't until after the trial that Siegel learned Darnell had denied saying Geter was a bad character. Lieutenant Fortenberry will not be interviewed, but after Darnell's denial, he did talk to a local station in Dallas.
I have not perjured myself, and anything further in regards to that, I'll stand on my testimony.
Did anybody call South Carolina to confirm this story, that Lenell Geter was a man with a, quote, bad reputation in South Carolina?
Well, Lenell Geter's reputation didn't have anything to do with the facts of the case that we prosecuted him for. It had only to do with his punishment, and that was one witness out of several that said he had a bad reputation.
There were 2 other witnesses, and it turned out that those witnesses were policemen from another town who'd heard of that bad reputation, either directly or indirectly, from Lieutenant Fortenberry. And there's one more thing that's important to know about the Lenell Geter story. Remember that first Kentucky Fried Chicken robbery here in Greenville? The one that first brought Lenell Geter into the mind of Lieutenant Fortenberry because of that phone call he'd received about the out-of-state car seen at a local park. Carla Wright worked in this restaurant, and Lieutenant Fortenberry showed her a photo lineup.
And were you able to identify anybody in those pictures as the robber?
No, sir.
Later, you did see Lenell Geter, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Was that the man who held up the Kentucky Fried Chicken?
No, sir.
You're sure of that?
Sure.
Mike Brown also saw the hold-up man. When he was shown a photo lineup by Lieutenant Fortenberry, Brown picked out 2 men who looked something like the hold-up man. Neither one was Geter. How did Lieutenant Fortenberry react?
He didn't say anything to me. It was just the way, it was the kind of feeling you get when you think like you've disappointed somebody, like you've given them the wrong answer.
You now know what Lenell Geter looks like.
Oh,
You've seen
exactly.
him, right?
Exactly.
Is that the man who held up the Kentucky Fried Chicken?
Elaine Moody was a customer that day in the Greenville Kentucky Fried Chicken. She too saw the robber. But more important, she was an employee at E-Systems and knew Lenell Geter.
He is very friendly, and he always called me by my name.
So you were on a first-name basis?
Yes.
So had that been Lenell Geter in there holding up that restaurant?
I think he would have said hello. and I don't think he would have continued on to rob the place either.
Right. So you're absolutely, what, 100% positive it was not Lenell Geter who held up that restaurant?
Absolutely.
So all the eyewitnesses of the Greenville holdup cleared him of that robbery, and the police did not press charges. But it was that robbery that put his name and his face into the criminal justice system. And all because his car was seen with out-of-state plates in this Greenville park. The phone call reporting that car set off a chain of events that ended with a door slammed shut on the life of Lenell Geter.
I've received no justice at all. I haven't received anything close to justice. I consider myself a hostage. Actually, I do consider myself a hostage in the house of injustice.
Whether or not Lenell Geter is innocent, there are so many reasonable doubts about his guilt and doubts about the trial and investigation that many feel at the very least he deserves a new trial. The NAACP joined the defense in a request for a new trial, which was denied by the same judge who tried Geter originally. They filed an appeal, and the FBI has investigated to see if Geter's civil rights have been violated. No decision yet on that. After Geter's trial, he was given a polygraph test. The examiner said Geter showed deception, but refused to say whether or not he thought Geter had failed, and he refuses to release the test to Geter's lawyer so that it can be examined by another expert. Geter did pass another test, one using drugs and hypnosis. And finally, the South Carolina legislature and the state attorney general have asked the Texas Attorney General, Jim Maddox, to look into the case of Lenell Geter. Mr. Maddox has problems of his own. He's under indictment for commercial bribery. Meanwhile, Lenell Geter remains in jail, possibly for life.
He was out of jail, released from prison within 4 days of our broadcast. Very satisfying moment for 60 Minutes and certainly for me.